The body camera footage is crystal clear. Officer Martinez points at the elderly black man standing calmly on the sidewalk and shouts the words that would end his career. "Rex, attack!" The German shepherd charges forward, muscles coiled, trained for aggression. 72-year-old Walter Thompson doesn't run. He doesn't scream. He simply stands there as 90 pounds of police dog barrels toward him. But what happened next shocked everyone in that courtroom 3 months later. The charging dog suddenly stops dead in his tracks, sits, and gently places his head under the old man's weathered hand. That single moment of defiance, not from a human but from a police dog, would spark a viral movement, end a corrupt cop's career, and prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes have 4 legs and a badge. To understand how one police dog became America's most famous whistleblower, we need to go back to where this all started. Walter Thompson lived the kind of invisible life that America forgets about. At 72, the Vietnam veteran occupied a small studio apartment 3 blocks from the VA hospital in Richmond, Virginia. His daily routine was simple: coffee at 6 a.m., morning pills for the shrapnel still lodged near his spine, and a slow walk to whatever appointment the government had scheduled for him. The walls of his apartment told the story of a man time had left behind. A faded bronze star certificate hung crooked above a small TV. Dog-eared paperbacks lined makeshift shelves. And on his nightstand, a photo of himself at 19, holding a German shepherd named King somewhere in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Walter had been a dog handler in Vietnam. For 13 months, King had been his partner, his early warning system his best friend. They'd saved each other's lives more times than Walter could count. When King stepped on a mine in 1971, Walter carried his dying partner 2 miles to a medic, even with shrapnel in his own back. He'd never owned another dog since. Most days, Walter kept to himself. He'd nod politely to neighbors, shop at the corner market where the owner knew to accept his food stamps without making him feel ashamed, and avoid the groups of younger men who hung out on the street corners. Not because he feared them, but because he'd learned that a 72-year-old black veteran drew the wrong kind of attention in a neighborhood where old buildings were being torn down for luxury condos. Walter Thompson had survived a war, poverty, and decades of nightmares. He thought he'd seen the worst of what people could do to each other. He was wrong. The statistics are staggering, though they rarely make headlines. On any given night, 40,000 veterans sleep on America's streets. Another 1.4 million are at risk of homelessness. In Richmond alone, 15% of the homeless population served their country in uniform. Walter wasn't homeless, but the line was thin. His disability check covered rent and little else. The VA provided health care, but getting to appointments meant walking. His 1998 Honda had died 2 years ago, and he couldn't afford repairs. So Walter walked everywhere, a dignified figure in thrift store clothes, carrying in himself with the posture that never quite leaves a soldier. The neighborhood around Walter's apartment was changing fast. Coffee shops with $6 lattes replaced corner stores. Young professionals in BMWs navigated streets where Walter had walked safely for 8 years. The new residents looked through him like he was part of the old scenery they'd rather forget. It was this changing landscape that put Walter on a collision course with Officer Miguel Martinez. Martinez had been with Richmond PD for 6 years, long enough to know which neighborhoods the department prioritized. The gentrifying areas got extra patrols, not to protect residents like Walter, but to move them along. Martinez understood his role: make the undesirable elements uncomfortable enough that they'd relocate somewhere else. At 34, Martinez had joined the force after a brief stint in the Army that ended in a dishonorable discharge for insubordination. He carried resentment like a badge, taking particular pleasure in exercising authority over people who reminded him of his own failures. Veterans especially irritated him. Their quiet dignity felt like judgment of his own lack of honor. On March 15th, these two men's paths would cross in a way that would change both their lives forever. 5 minutes that changed 2 lives. The pharmacy visit should have been routine. Walter's arthritis medication was ready for pickup, a monthly ritual that required a 6-block walk from his apartment. It was 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, the spring sun warm enough that Walter had left his jacket at home. At the intersection of Grove and Harrison, Walter made a decision that seemed insignificant at the time. The crosswalk signal was red, but traffic was light. Looking both ways like his mother had taught him 60 years ago, Walter stepped into the street. Officer Martinez saw him from 2 blocks away. The body camera footage, which would later be viewed millions of times, shows Martinez immediately reaching for his radio. "I've got a code violation at Grove and Harrison," he reported, though jaywalking rarely warranted such immediate attention. By the time Walter reached the other side of the street, Martinez had parked his cruiser and was approaching on foot. Sir, stop right there." Walter turned, confused. He'd been walking normally, bothering no one. The approaching officer was young, aggressive in his stride, hand resting on his weapon belt in a way that Walter recognized from his military days, a man looking for confrontation. "You just committed a traffic violation," Martinez announced, pulling out his citation book with theatrical authority. "Officer, Walter began, his voice calm and respectful. 60 years in America had taught him exactly how to speak to angry white men in uniform. "Don't interrupt me when I'm talking," Martinez snapped. "You jaywalked. That's a 150 fine." The body camera captured it all. Walter's confused compliance, his respectful "yes, sir" responses, his slow movements as he reached for his wallet with hands visible at all times. This was a man who understood the rules of engagement, who'd survived this dance before. But Martinez wasn't interested in routine compliance. He was performing for an audience of one, himself, and the performance required escalation. "Have you been drinking today, sir?" "No, officer, I don't drink." "I'm going to need to see some identification. Move slowly." Walter produced his veteran's ID card along with his driver's license. Martinez studied them with exaggerated suspicion, though both were clearly legitimate. "Walter Thompson," Martinez read aloud, making the name sound like an accusation. "Says here you're 72. You sure you should be wandering around the streets unsupervised?" The insult was deliberate, designed to provoke a response that would justify further escalation. But Walter had faced worse than this cocky young officer. He remained silent. That silence infuriated Martinez more than any comeback could have. "I asked you a question, old man." "I was just going to the pharmacy, officer. I live 3 blocks from here." "Turn around and put your hands on the wall." This was the moment that would later be analyzed by lawyers, activists, and use-of-force experts. Walter Thompson had committed a minor traffic violation. He'd been cooperative, respectful, and compliant. There was no legal justification for a search. But Walter knew that legal justification and street survival were 2 different things. He turned toward the brick wall of the pharmacy and placed his palms flat against it. Martinez's pat-down was aggressive, invasive, designed more to humiliate than to ensure safety. The body camera recorded every second of it, including Walter's quiet dignity as he endured the harassment. "He's clean," Martinez muttered, though he seemed disappointed by this fact. That's when Walter made his mistake. As Martinez stepped back, Walter turned around and asked, "Officer, am I free to go now?" It was a reasonable question. The search was complete, the citation written. But to Martinez it sounded like a challenge to his authority. "Did I say you could move?" "No, sir. I just thought—" "Turn back around. Now you're resisting." The body camera footage would later show clearly that Walter hadn't resisted anything. He'd asked a polite question and begun to turn back toward the wall when ordered. But Martinez was already reaching for his radio. "Unit 47 requesting K-9 backup at Grove and Harrison. I've got a combative subject resisting arrest." Walter's heart sank. He'd seen enough young men in his neighborhood to know what combative and resisting meant when called in by certain officers. It meant the situation was about to get much worse. "Officer, please, I'm not resisting anything. I'm a veteran. I understand orders." But Martinez had already crossed a line in his own mind. He'd committed to a narrative, dangerous black man resisting arrest, and now he needed to make reality match his report. "Face the wall and don't move until backup arrives." So Walter stood there, hands against the brick, while Martinez called in reinforcements for a 72-year-old man whose only crime was crossing an empty street. That's when Martinez made the call that would end his career. "And send Rex, I might need a dog." Officer Jake Davis had been handling police dogs for 8 years, but Rex was special. The 3-year-old German Shepherd had the ideal temperament for K-9 work. Intelligent, obedient, and, when necessary, absolutely fearless. Rex could track suspects through city streets, detect drugs with 95% accuracy, and, when commanded, take down a grown man in seconds. But Rex had never been deployed against a 72-year-old veteran standing peacefully against a pharmacy wall. Davis and Rex arrived at the scene within minutes. The radio call had been clear. Combative subject, resisting arrest, need K-9 assistance. Davis expected to find Martinez struggling with a dangerous suspect. Instead, he found a scene that immediately felt wrong. Walter Thompson stood motionless against the wall, hands flat against the brick, exactly as he'd been positioned 15 minutes earlier. His posture was compliant, non-threatening. He wasn't sweating, breathing heavily, or showing any signs of someone who'd been combative. Martinez, however, was agitated, pacing, clearly worked up about something that didn't match what Davis was seeing. "What's the situation?" Davis asked. "Old man here jaywalked, then started getting aggressive when I tried to sight him. He's been resisting commands, acting erratic. I think he might be on something." Davis looked at Walter again. The elderly man's hands were steady, his breathing calm. If he was on drugs, they were very different drugs than Davis had ever encountered. But Davis was a team player. He'd worked with Martinez before and knew the officer had a reputation for creative interpretations of suspect behavior. Still, if Martinez said backup was needed, Davis would provide it. "What do you need from Rex? I want him ready in case this guy tries to run or fight." It was an unusual request. K-9 units were typically deployed for tracking, drug detection, or crowd control. Using a police dog to intimidate a compliant suspect was questionable at best. But Martinez was the primary officer on the scene. Davis positioned Rex at his side and waited. That's when things took a turn that no one, not Martinez, not Davis, and certainly not Walter, could have predicted. Rex was trained to read situations, to assess threats, to respond to the emotional energy of the humans around him. And what Rex sensed in that moment wasn't danger from the old man against the wall. It was something else entirely. Walter Thompson hadn't owned a dog in 50 years, but some knowledge lives in your bones. When he heard the clicking of claws on concrete behind him, something deep in his memory stirred, the sound of a working dog approaching. The scent of German Shepherd carried on the breeze. Without thinking, Walter turned his head slightly and made a sound he hadn't made since Vietnam. A soft, low whistle, the kind dog handlers use to get their partner's attention without alerting the enemy. Rex's ears shot up immediately. Martinez saw the movement and exploded. "I told you not to move. That's it. You're under arrest." He grabbed Walter's wrist to cuff him, and that's when the 72-year-old veteran's training kicked in. Not to fight, Walter Thompson hadn't thrown a punch since 1973, but to protect himself. He pulled his arm away instinctively, a natural response to sudden physical contact. "He's resistin'! He's resistin'!" Martinez shouted, loud enough for his body camera to record clearly. Davis watched the scene unfold with growing unease. Martinez was escalating a situation that had been completely calm seconds earlier. The old man wasn't resisting. He was confused, maybe a little scared, but not combative. That's when Martinez made the decision that would destroy his career and create a viral sensation. He pointed directly at Walter Thompson and shouted the command that every K-9 officer hoped never to use unnecessarily: "Rex, attack!" Time moved differently in the seconds that followed. Rex, trained to obey without question, launched himself forward. 90 pounds of muscle and teeth, bred for pursuit, programmed for takedown. The German Shepherd covered the 15 feet between himself and Walter Thompson in less than 2 seconds. Martinez smiled. This was the outcome he'd been orchestrating from the moment he'd seen Walter cross that street. An old black man resisting arrest, a police dog doing what police dogs do. The narrative was perfect. Davis felt his stomach drop. Something about this felt deeply wrong, but Rex was already in motion, and police dogs don't have brake pedals. Walter Thompson heard the animal charging toward him and felt 50 years disappear in an instant. Suddenly, he was 19 again, in a jungle clearing with his partner King at his side. The sound of a German Shepherd in full sprint was burned into his nervous system. But instead of running or cowering, Walter did something that came from a place deeper than conscious thought. He turned to face the charging dog, dropped to one knee, and spoke in the firm, calm voice that had once commanded respect in the chaos of war. "Rex, sit." It wasn't a scream or a plea. It was the voice of authority, of someone who understood dogs not as weapons but as partners. It carried the weight of experience, the certainty of someone who'd spent 13 months trusting his life to a German Shepherd's intelligence. Rex hit the brakes so hard his claws scraped concrete. For a moment that felt like an eternity. The police dog stood frozen 3 feet from Walter, every muscle tensed, trained instincts warring with something deeper. Rex had been commanded to attack by his handler, but this voice, this calm, authoritative voice, spoke to something else entirely. Martinez stared in disbelief. "Rex, I said attack." But Rex wasn't listening to Martinez anymore. The dog approached Walter slowly, almost cautiously, and did something that would be viewed millions of times on phones around the world. Rex sat down directly in front of Walter Thompson and gently placed his massive head under the old man's outstretched hand. Walter's weathered fingers found the familiar spot behind Rex's ears, the same place he'd scratched every morning in Vietnam when King would wake him for patrol. Muscle memory guided his touch as he spoke softly to the dog in the voice that had once calmed a terrified puppy in a war zone. "Good boy. You're a good boy." Martinez's face turned purple with rage. "What the hell are you doing? Rex, attack command, now!" But Rex had made his choice. The dog leaned into Walter's gentle touch, tail beginning to wag, body language completely relaxed. Every person watching, Davis, Martinez, the small crowd beginning to gather, could see that Rex had found something in Walter Thompson that transcended training and commands. Davis felt something break open in his chest. In 8 years of K-9 work, he'd never seen anything like this. Rex was the most obedient dog he'd ever worked with, trained to follow commands without hesitation. But here he was, completely ignoring a direct attack order, choosing instead to seek comfort from the man he'd been sent to hurt. That's when Davis noticed the bystander with the phone. Maria Santos had been coming out of the pharmacy when she heard the commotion. At first, she'd assumed it was just another routine police stop. But when she saw the officer screaming at a police dog to attack an elderly man who was clearly no threat to anyone, she started recording. The video she captured would change everything. It showed Walter Thompson, calm and dignified, kneeling on the sidewalk with a police dog's head cradled in his hands. It showed Officer Martinez, red-faced and furious, screaming commands that the dog refused to obey. And it showed the moment when Davis made the decision that would save his career and his soul. "Martinez, stand down. The situation is under control." "Like hell it is. That dog disobeyed a direct command." "The dog made the right call," Davis said quietly, but his body camera recorded every word. "Look at them." Anyone with eyes could see what Davis meant. Walter Thompson posed no threat to anyone. He was an elderly man who'd been harassed over a jaywalking ticket, who'd somehow found a way to communicate with a police dog in a language older than training manuals and procedural guidelines. Rex, meanwhile, had never looked more at peace. The dog that had been trained for aggression was receiving the first gentle touch he'd experienced in months of law enforcement work. "This is bullshit," Martinez snarled, but he could see the crowd growing larger, phones coming out, his perfect narrative crumbling in real time. That's when Davis made the choice that would define his career. "Walter, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" It was the first time anyone had called him by his name, the first time anyone had treated him like a human being instead of a problem to be solved. "No, sir," Walter replied quietly, still stroking Rex's head. "I'm fine. He's a good dog. Reminds me of my partner in Vietnam." The words hit Davis like a physical blow. Vietnam veteran, dog handler. Suddenly, everything made sense. The calm authority in Walter's voice, Rex's immediate response, the way Walter moved his hands with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this before. Martinez realized his narrative was completely destroyed. A Vietnam veteran dog handler was not going to play well in his report about a combative subject. The optics were devastating. "Everyone back up. Show's over," Martinez shouted at the gathering crowd, but it was too late. Maria Santos had already uploaded her video to Facebook with the caption, "Police dog refuses to attack elderly veteran." Within hours, it would have 50,000 views. By the next morning, it would go viral. But the real moment of truth was still coming. As Davis gently coaxed Rex away from Walter, Martinez made one final play to salvage his story. "Davis, I need you to write this up as a subject interfering with a police animal. The old man obviously did something to confuse the dog." Davis looked at Martinez, then at Walter Thompson still kneeling on the sidewalk, then at Rex, who was looking back at the elderly veteran with something that looked remarkably like affection. "No," Davis said simply. "What did you say?" "I said no. I'm not filing a false report." It was the first time in 6 years that anyone had directly challenged Martinez's version of events. And Davis wasn't finished. "Mr. Thompson, you're free to go. I apologize for the inconvenience." Martinez's career had just ended, though he didn't know it yet. Martinez spent the ride back to the station crafting his story. The key was to get ahead of any narrative that made him look bad. He'd dealt with complaints before. Citizens always claimed police brutality when they got arrested. Internal affairs was used to dismissing the accusations of combative subjects, but this time was different, and Martinez knew it. The problem was Davis. In 6 years of partnership, Davis had never refused to back up Martinez's version of events. Police solidarity was supposed to be absolute. You protected your partner, even when your partner was wrong, especially when your partner was wrong. Martinez pulled Davis aside in the parking garage before they entered the building. "Look, Jake, I know that situation got a little weird back there, but you know how these things work. We write up what happened according to procedure, file the reports, and move on." Davis had been dreading this conversation. "Miguel, what exactly do you want me to write?" Subject jaywalked, became aggressive when sighted, resisted arrest, interfered with police animal, standard stuff. That's not what happened. Martinez's voice dropped to a whisper. It's what needs to have happened. You've got 8 years on the force, a perfect record, a pension to think about. You really want to throw all that away for some old homeless guy? He's not homeless. He's a veteran. He's a problem that needs to go away. And if you don't help me make that happen, you're going to become a problem too. Davis felt something crystallize in his mind. For 8 years, he'd been a good soldier, following orders, backing up his partners, keeping his head down. But Rex had shown him something back on that sidewalk. Sometimes the right choice and the obedient choice weren't the same thing. I'm going to write what actually happened, Miguel. Martinez's face went cold. You do that, and I'll make sure everyone knows you're the kind of cop who throws his partners under the bus. Good luck getting backup when you need it. But the threat felt empty. Davis had seen Martinez's true character that afternoon, and he knew that backing up a bad cop didn't make you a good cop. It just made you complicit. That evening, Martinez filed his report first, hoping to establish the official narrative before Davis could contradict it. According to Officer Martinez, Walter Thompson had jaywalked, became belligerent when cited, physically resisted arrest, and used unknown methods to interfere with police dog Rex, preventing the animal from following lawful commands. Recommended charges: jaywalking, resisting arrest, interference with police operations, and assault on a police officer. If Martinez's version stood, Walter Thompson would face up to 2 years in prison. But Martinez had made one crucial mistake. He'd forgotten about the phones. Maria Santos wasn't an activist. She was a 34-year-old nurse, mother of 2, who'd never posted anything more controversial than pictures of her kids' birthday parties. But something about what she'd witnessed outside the pharmacy had shaken her to her core. She uploaded the video at 6:47 p.m. with a simple caption. This police officer ordered his dog to attack an elderly black veteran for jaywalking. The dog refused. We need to do better. At first, the video gained traction slowly. Maria's Facebook friends shared it with their friends, who shared it with their friends. By midnight, it had 5,000 views and 200 shares. But viral content follows its own logic. At 2:17 a.m., a Twitter account with 50,000 followers discovered the Facebook video and reposted it with the caption, "Thread: Why police dogs are smarter than police officers." That's when everything exploded. By 6 a.m., #Justice4Walter was trending nationally. The video had been viewed 500,000 times across multiple platforms. News stations were picking up the story. Veterans organizations were demanding investigations. And in his small apartment, Walter Thompson woke up to 17 missed calls and a crowd of reporters outside his building. The story had everything that makes content go viral in America: racial injustice, police accountability, and sympathetic elderly victim, and an animal hero. The old man obviously did something to confuse the dog. Davis looked at Martinez, then at Walter Thompson still kneeling on the sidewalk, then at Rex, who was looking back at the elderly veteran with something that looked remarkably like affection. "No," Davis said simply. "What did you say?" "I said no. I'm not filing a false report." It was the first time in 6 years that anyone had directly challenged Martinez's version of events. And Davis wasn't finished. "Mr. Thompson, you're free to go. I apologize for the inconvenience." Martinez's career had just ended, though he didn't know it yet. Martinez spent the ride back to the station crafting his story. The key was to get ahead of any narrative that made him look bad. He'd dealt with complaints before. Citizens always claimed police brutality when they got arrested. Internal affairs was used to dismissing the accusations of combative subjects. But this time was different, and Martinez knew it. The problem was Davis. In 6 years of partnership, Davis had never refused to back up Martinez's version of events. Police solidarity was supposed to be absolute. You protected your partner, even when your partner was wrong, especially when your partner was wrong. Martinez pulled Davis aside in the parking garage before they entered the building. "Look, Jake, I know that situation got a little weird back there, but you know how these things work. We write up what happened according to procedure, file the reports, and move on." Davis had been dreading this conversation. "Miguel, what exactly do you want me to write?" Subject jaywalked, became aggressive when cited, resisted arrest, interfered with police animal, standard stuff. "That's not what happened." Martinez's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's what needs to have happened. You've got 8 years on the force, a perfect record, a pension to think about. You really want to throw all that away for some old homeless guy? He's not homeless. He's a veteran. He's a problem that needs to go away. And if you don't help me make that happen, you're going to become a problem too." Davis felt something crystallize in his mind. For 8 years, he'd been a good soldier, following orders, backing up his partners, keeping his head down. But Rex had shown him something back on that sidewalk. Sometimes the right choice and the obedient choice weren't the same thing. "I'm going to write what actually happened, Miguel." Martinez's face went cold. "You do that, and I'll make sure everyone knows you're the kind of cop who throws his partners under the bus. Good luck getting backup when you need it." But the threat felt empty. Davis had seen Martinez's true character that afternoon, and he knew that backing up a bad cop didn't make you a good cop. It just made you complicit. That evening, Martinez filed his report first, hoping to establish the official narrative before Davis could contradict it. According to Officer Martinez, Walter Thompson had jaywalked, became belligerent when cited, physically resisted arrest, and used unknown methods to interfere with police dog Rex, preventing the animal from following lawful commands. Recommended charges: jaywalking, resisting arrest, interference with police operations, and assault on a police officer. If Martinez's version stood, Walter Thompson would face up to 2 years in prison. But Martinez had made one crucial mistake. He'd forgotten about the phones. Maria Santos wasn't an activist. She was a 34-year-old nurse, mother of 2, who'd never posted anything more controversial than pictures of her kids' birthday parties. But something about what she'd witnessed outside the pharmacy had shaken her to her core. She uploaded the video at 6:47 p.m. with a simple caption. This police officer ordered his dog to attack an elderly black veteran for jaywalking. The dog refused. We need to do better. At first, the video gained traction slowly. Maria's Facebook friends shared it with their friends, who shared it with their friends. By midnight, it had 5,000 views and 200 shares. But viral content follows its own logic. At 2:17 a.m., a Twitter account with 50,000 followers discovered the Facebook video and reposted it with the caption, "Thread: Why police dogs are smarter than police officers." That's when everything exploded. By 6 a.m., #JusticeForWalter was trending nationally. The video had been viewed 500,000 times across multiple platforms. News stations were picking up the story. Veterans organizations were demanding investigations. And in his small apartment, Walter Thompson woke up to 17 missed calls and a crowd of reporters outside his building. The story had everything that makes content go viral in America: racial injustice, police accountability, a sympathetic elderly victim, and an animal hero. Martinez's own camera showed him escalating a routine citation into a confrontation without any provocation from Walter. "Officer Martinez, in this footage, can you point to any moment where Mr. Thompson appears combative?" Martinez squirmed. He questioned my authority when he asked if he was free to go." Judge Williams raised an eyebrow. Officer Martinez, are you testifying that asking, "Am I free to go?" constitutes combative behavior? The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Even the prosecutor looked embarrassed. But the real devastation came when Davis took the stand. Officer Davis, you were present during this entire incident, correct? Yes, ma'am. In your professional opinion, as a K-9 officer with 8 years of experience, did Mr. Thompson pose any threat that would justify deploying your dog? Davis looked directly at Martinez before answering. No, ma'am. Mr. Thompson was never a threat to anyone. Rex recognized that immediately. Can you explain what you mean by that? Police dogs are trained to assess situations, to read body language and emotional states. Rex is one of the best I've worked with. When he approached Mr. Thompson, he recognized someone who understood dogs, someone who meant no harm. And when Officer Martinez ordered Rex to attack, Rex made the right call. He chose to disobey an unlawful order. The phrase unlawful order hung in the courtroom like a bomb. Davis had just testified that his fellow officer's command was illegal. Martinez's lawyer tried to salvage something on cross-examination. Officer Davis, isn't it dangerous to have police dogs that don't follow commands? Davis smiled for the first time in weeks. Rex followed the most important command of all, the one that says protect and serve. He protected Mr. Thompson from an unjustified attack, and he served justice better than any of the humans in that situation. The gallery broke out in applause before Judge Williams could call for order. But the moment that sealed Martinez's fate came when the defense called Walter Thompson to the stand. Walter walked slowly to the witness chair, his dignity intact despite everything he'd endured. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear, carrying the authority of someone who'd seen real combat and real courage. Mr. Thompson, can you tell the court about your experience with dogs? I was a dog handler in Vietnam, ma'am. 13 months with my partner King. We trusted each other with our lives every day. And when you encountered Rex that afternoon? Walter's voice softened. That dog knew I wasn't a threat. Animals don't lie, Your Honor. They don't have agendas or prejudices. Rex looked at me and saw someone who understood him, someone who respected what he was trained to do. What did you think when Officer Martinez ordered the dog to attack you? Walter was quiet for a long moment. I thought about King, how he died protecting me in a war 50 years ago. And I thought about how some things never change. There's always someone who wants to use good dogs for bad purposes. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people wiping their eyes. Judge Williams had heard enough. I'm dismissing all charges against Mr. Thompson. Furthermore, I'm recommending that the district attorney investigate whether Officer Martinez should face charges for filing false reports and excessive use of force. Martinez's career was over, but his legal troubles were just beginning. As the courtroom emptied, something remarkable happened. Rex, who'd been waiting outside with Davis, somehow broke free from his handler and bounded into the courtroom. Before anyone could stop him, the German Shepherd made a beeline for Walter Thompson. The reunion was captured by dozens of phone cameras. Walter kneeling down, Rex jumping up to put his paws on the old man's shoulders, tail wagging so hard his entire body shook. Walter's face, which had shown such dignity and restraint throughout his ordeal, finally broke into a smile. Good boy, he whispered into Rex's ear. You're such a good boy. In that moment, everyone in the courtroom understood what they'd witnessed. Not just a case of police misconduct exposed, but a reminder that moral courage can come from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes it takes a dog to show humans how to behave. 6 months after that day in court, Walter Thompson's life had changed in ways both welcome and overwhelming. The viral fame had brought him opportunities he'd never expected. Speaking engagements at veterans events, a book deal he'd never pursue, and more interview requests than he could count. But what mattered most to Walter was the friendship that had grown from that moment of crisis. Every Tuesday, Officer Davis would stop by Walter's apartment with Rex for what they called community policing. Really, it was an excuse for Rex to spend time with the man who'd shown him that not every human was a threat, and for Walter to remember what it felt like to have a four-legged partner who trusted him completely. They'd walk through the neighborhood together, the elderly veteran, the police officer, and the German shepherd who'd become famous for choosing compassion over commands. Kids would run up to pet Rex, and Walter would tell them stories about working dogs, about the importance of treating animals with respect, about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to follow a bad order. Davis had transformed the K-9 training program, using Rex as an example of how police dogs could be partners in community building rather than just tools of enforcement. The Rex protocol, as it became known, emphasized reading situations, de-escalation, and the dog's natural ability to distinguish between real threats and manufactured ones. Martinez, meanwhile, faced federal charges for civil rights violations and filing false police reports. His conviction became a rare example of police accountability that satisfied both law enforcement reformers and supporters of good cops like Davis. But the real legacy of that March afternoon lived in the quieter moments. In Walter's apartment, where a new photo sat on his nightstand, himself, Davis, and Rex outside the courthouse, all of them smiling. In the neighborhood, where residents had learned Walter's name and story, treating him with the respect his service had always deserved. In the police department, where young officers were taught that courage sometimes means standing up to your partners when they're wrong. And in Rex, who had learned that following orders and doing right weren't always the same thing. On quiet evenings, Walter would sit on his small porch with Rex beside him, watching the neighborhood change around them. The gentrification continued, but somehow Walter felt less invisible now. People knew his story. They knew what he'd survived, what he'd sacrificed, what he'd taught a police dog about choosing love over fear. "You know what, Rex?" Walter would say, scratching behind the dog's ears in that familiar spot. "King would have liked you. You both understood something that took me 70 years to figure out." Rex would look up at him with those intelligent brown eyes, tail thumping against the porch steps. "Sometimes the smallest act of courage changes everything, not because it's big or dramatic, but because it reminds people what's possible when you choose to do right instead of what's easy." The story of Walter Thompson and Rex had become something larger than either of them. It was shared in police academies as an example of moral courage. Veterans groups used it to illustrate the continued service that former soldiers provided to their communities. Dog trainers pointed to Rex as proof that animals could be moral actors, capable of making ethical choices that humans sometimes couldn't see. But for Walter, the lesson was simpler and more personal. After 50 years of nightmares about King dying in that Vietnamese jungle, after decades of carrying guilt about surviving when his partner didn't, Walter had finally found peace. Rex had shown him that the bond between human and dog transcends training, transcends circumstances, transcends even time itself. It's built on something deeper: mutual respect, unconditional loyalty, and the shared understanding that some things are worth protecting, even from the people who claim to be in charge. On the wall of Walter's apartment, next to his Bronze Star and the faded photo from Vietnam, hung a new certificate. It was from the Richmond SPCA, naming him an honorary canine advocate for his work promoting ethical treatment of working dogs. But the honor Walter treasured most was simpler. Every Tuesday afternoon, when Rex would see him from a block away and start pulling Davis toward their reunion, tail wagging, whole body wiggling with excitement to see his friend. In a world that had often treated Walter Thompson as invisible, Rex saw him clearly. and in return, Walter had given Rex something that no amount of training could provide: the knowledge that he was loved not just as a tool or a weapon, but as an individual worthy of respect and gentleness. The viral video had been viewed over 50 million times, spawning countless reaction videos, news segments, and social media debates about police reform, racial justice, and animal rights. But those numbers couldn't capture the real impact of what happened that day. It lived in the young police officers who learned that courage sometimes means saying no to your fellow cops. In the community, members who stopped seeing Walter as just another elderly black man and started seeing him as Walter, veteran, dog lover, gentle soul who'd found a way to turn a moment of injustice into a lesson about love. And it lived in Rex, who had learned that the best commands come not from authority figures with badges, but from the quiet voice of someone who understands that strength and gentleness can exist in the same space. Every evening, as the sun set over Richmond and the gentrifying neighborhood settled into quiet, Walter would sit on his porch with his four-legged friend and remember what King had taught him all those years ago in the jungle. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with the simple refusal to let fear win over love. Rex had carried that lesson forward, across decades and circumstances, from one war to another kind of battlefield. And in doing so, he'd reminded an entire country that heroes come in all forms, sometimes with 2 legs, sometimes with 4, but always with the courage to choose what's right over what's expected. The story that began with the jaywalking ticket and an aggressive cop had become something much larger, a reminder that in a world that often seems broken, redemption is always possible. It just sometimes takes a dog to show us the way. As Walter liked to say when people asked him about that day, Rex didn't just disobey an order, he followed a higher one, the command to protect those who can't protect themselves, to choose love over fear, and to never forget that every human being deserves to be treated with dignity. Even, Walter would add with a smile, scratching Rex behind the ears, when humans forget that lesson themselves. In the end, that's what America learned from a 72-year-old veteran and a 3-year-old German shepherd. Sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply refusing to participate in cruelty. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is sit down, offer your head for a gentle touch, and remind the world what peace looks like. Rex had shown them all that following orders and following your conscience aren't always the same thing, and Walter Thompson had shown them that even after a lifetime of being overlooked and undervalued, it's never too late to become the hero someone else needs. The command that changed everything wasn't attack, it was sit. And in that simple act of disobedience, a police dog became a teacher, an elderly veteran became a symbol of dignity, and a moment of potential violence became a lesson in love that spread around the world. Some stories end with justice served. Others end with lessons learned. The best ones, like Walter and Rex's, end with the quiet understanding that courage comes in many forms, and sometimes the smallest acts of love can shift the entire world. Every Tuesday, you can still find them walking through their neighborhood together, an old soldier, a good cop, and a German shepherd who chose love over orders. They've become a symbol of what's possible when people, and their 4-legged partners, decide to do what's right instead of what's expected. And in a country that often feels divided by anger and fear, they serve as a daily reminder that sometimes the most powerful force for change is the simple decision to treat each other with kindness. After all, if a police dog can choose compassion over commands, maybe the rest of us can too.